Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Australopithecus. Before there were humans, there was Australopithecus. The Australopithecus is actually supposed to be the ancestor of the Homo lineage, which includes all the extinct human species of the past several million years. Australopithecus had human-like features which made it close to the Homo species, and yet it's never actually been proven that Homo sapiens ever evolved from Australopithecus, making this a huge mystery. Australopithecus is currently the oldest human-shaped creature that we know about. The oldest fossil ever is a canine tooth which belonged to the species Australopithecus afarensis, which was 3.5 million years old. That was about 1.4 million years before the first Homo species, the Homo habilis, which I'll tell you about in a minute. But what separates the Australopithecus from the Homo species? That's actually a point of contention for scientists. Typically, Homo species are defined by their use of stone tools at the beginning of the Lower Paleolithic era. However, in 2010, evidence was discovered of an Australopithecus afarensis using stone tools 3.3 million years ago. But the biggest difference is all about brain size. The original Australopithecus gari had roughly 28 cubic inches of endocranial volume. That's a fancy way of saying brain size. The Homo habilis had 46 cubic inches of endocranial volume. The brain almost doubled. And by the time the Neanderthals came around, the endocranial volume or brain size had increased to 107 cubic inches. That's almost 4 times bigger. Still, what caused the brain to grow so dramatically continues to be a mystery to this very day. In fact, some fringe theories believe the Australopithecus discovered magic mushrooms in the wilds of Africa and started eating them. The hallucinogenic fungus helped start a process that massively increased intelligence and brain size. However, it's just a theory and hasn't been proven. Number 9. Homo habilis. Homo habilis, or handyman for short, came into existence roughly 2.31 million years ago. It was one of the longest surviving human ancestors, as it continued to wander across the lands of East and South Africa up until 1.65 million years ago. The species was first described in 1964, and by the 1980s was recognized as the original human ancestor. This was the first species of the Homo genus that came after the Australopithecus, the first hominin with a large brain that was capable of using stone tools. What's quite fascinating is that based on multiple specimens that have been discovered in Africa, the Homo habilis had a very similar body to the most recent Australopithecus. It may have had a bigger brain, but it had the same general skeleton. It was small in stature and males were bigger than females. Males were about 3 feet 11 inches and the females were around 3 feet 3 inches. Another major difference between the first species of Homo and the last species of Australopithecus was meat eating. Scientists believe that Homo habilis consumed larger quantities of meat than its previous ancestors. The Homo habilis lived in extremely primitive societies that scientists believe were similar to chimpanzee or baboon societies. There would have been between 70 and 85 members of the troop, and this would have helped defend against predators like big cats and crocodiles. Number 8. Homo erectus. Beyond the Homo habilis is the Homo erectus, the second oldest of our species. Homo erectus is also called the upright man, and for good reason. This was the very first human ancestor with proportions similar to what we have today. Rather than hobbling around like chimpanzees, the Homo erectus walked very similar to the way we walk today, upright. Their legs were long, they had shorter arms than they used to, and they were more adapted to living life on the ground. Scientists believe it was the separation from living in trees and jungles that caused the evolution of the Homo erectus, and thus massively changed the physiology of humans. Whereas the Homo habilis was extremely short, the Homo erectus could grow to massive sizes of up to 6 feet 1 inch. In other words, they could grow to be pretty much the same height as we are today. They lived up until around 110,000 years ago. However, it is important to note that even though the Homo erectus was alive up until 110,000 years ago, they weren't the only ones. The Homo erectus coexisted with other branches of humans, even at the time of their creation 1.9 million years ago. For just shy of 2 million years, Homo erectus and other species spread across the globe and may have even fought for dominance. That said, by the end of their time range, when they went extinct, there were likely only 3 main competitors left: Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Homofloresiensis. Number 7. The Denisovans. The Denisovans are very close relatives to modern humans and were only recently added to our family tree. Their remains were discovered in a Siberian cave back in 2010, and while not everything is known about them, scientists are confident about a few things. First, they appear to have been a very distinct breed of ancient people who lived in Siberia during the Ice Age. And second, they were probably related to both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. In fact, some researchers suggest, based on DNA samples, that the Denisovans were a hybrid of modern people and Neanderthals. Here's where the Denisovans most likely came from. Sometime around 300,000 to 400,000 years ago, a group of Homo Heidelbergensis left Africa. These extremely primitive people wandered into Eurasia, and then the group split in half. One part of the group migrated into Europe and evolved to become Neanderthals. The other group migrated into Asia and became the Denisovans. And that really sums up human evolution in a nutshell. One person goes left, the other person goes right, and tens of thousands of years later, they are a totally different species. Even more interesting is that the group that didn't even leave Africa and stayed put were the ones who evolved into Homo sapiens. What do you think so far about the evolution process? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Homo Heidelbergensis. Homo heidelbergensis appeared about 700,000 years ago and went extinct 200,000 years ago. The very first specimen of this creature was discovered in Germany in 1908. A workman near the city of Heidelberg came across a mandible in a sand pit, and this helped to build a clear picture of one of the most important human ancestors. Homo heidelbergensis was slightly smaller than the Homo erectus, standing no taller than 5 feet 9 inches. However, they may have been more intelligent. Evidence has been found at the site of Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel of these primitive people controlling fire. They may have built fireplaces before any other species, keeping themselves warm inside caves and socializing over heated food and bright lights. This may have been the very first Homo species which took advantage of natural shelters. Proof of them has been found all the way from the caves of Israel to the caves of France. And here's another huge thing about Homo heidelbergensis. They were the very first, according to the Smithsonian National Museum of Natural History, to hunt large animals. This would have included elephants, hippopotamuses, and even rhinoceroses. Ancient wooden spears were found in Germany from 400,000 years ago, along with the remains of 10 butchered horses. And so, the Heidelbergensis was most likely spawned from the erectus, and it also was the beginning of the Neanderthals and the Denisovans. Heidelbergensis remained living alongside them all until 200,000 years ago. Number 5. Homo naledi. Homo naledi was very recently added to the list of extinct human species. Evidence of the animal was discovered while researchers were digging through the Rising Star cave system in South Africa. They discovered lots of hominin remains, and the cave actually turned out to be the richest fossil site of its kind in Africa, according to National Geographic. The excavations revealed a mysterious species with a bizarre jumble of traits. It had a tiny brain, shoulders, and a torso just like an ape, and yet it had human features as well. More recent studies from 2015 say Homo naledi lived as far back as 335,000 years ago. And while that at first may not mean anything, it's actually hugely significant. It means that at the same time as our very own species was evolving from our ancestors with large brains, there was a smaller lineage emerging with tiny brains. This small-brained ape-human hybrid likely got its DNA from a different animal millions of years ago, and it may have lived all the way into the Stone Age. However, that last part has not been fully proven. Number 4. Homofloresiensis. Homofloresiensis is beyond any shadow of a doubt the most fascinating ancient hominin. This species has been nicknamed the Hobbit, and they lived in Indonesia up until about 17,000 years ago. The first fossils were discovered in the Liangboa cave on the island of Flores back in 2003. The initial specimen was called LB1 and included a complete female skull and an almost complete skeleton, including pieces from the hands and feet, pelvis, and limbs. This is huge in the world of paleontology, when normally only a handful of teeth or a jawbone are discovered. But what was really fascinating and what really floored researchers and took their breath away was just how short the woman was. She died sometime around the age of 30, yet only grew to be 3.5 feet tall. And as more and more fossils were unearthed, it became obvious that Homofloresiensis was a completely separate species of hominin that were the size of hobbits. They lived at the exact same time as us, so in the grand scheme of Earth's timeline, it was basically yesterday. And yet they were smaller, more squat versions of us. And as far as anyone can tell, they only lived in Indonesia. All these years later, scientists are still struggling to figure out where Homofloresiensis fits on the family tree, and how in the world such a branch of humanity existed until so recently. Scientists are also trying to figure out how they went extinct, seeing as they probably wouldn't have been under threat so secluded in the jungle. Any theories? Let me know in the comments below. Number 3. The Neanderthal. The Neanderthals are a major mystery, yet are likely our closest human relative. They arrived on the scene 400,000 years ago and didn't go extinct until 40,000 years before today. They also looked a lot more like us than most of our other extinct ancestors. Whereas groups like Homo habilis were covered in fur and hair and grew to be quite tall, Neanderthals were shorter and a lot less hairy. Males on average were only 5'5", with women slightly shorter at 5'1". What really set the Neanderthal apart from all the other ancient humans was that they had gigantic brains. In fact, they had brains just as large as ours, maybe even bigger, which means they may have been smarter than us. Not only were they smarter than us, but they were a lot stronger. They were shorter, stockier, better adapted to living in brutal conditions, and still retained much of their primitive ape strength. Thanks to their big brains, the Neanderthals were able to use all kinds of sophisticated tools. They built shelters, made clothing to wear, and ate a diverse diet of plants and animals. They even sometimes made decorations and sentimental objects, showing the first real progression from animal instinct to human curiosity. And finally, there has been evidence that they marked their graves with flowers, something no other early human species has ever been caught doing. Number 2. The Great Extinction and the Rise of Homo sapiens. 300,000 years ago, there were at least 9 human species wandering around the planet. Now, there is only one. We had the Denisovans and erectus in Asia and the Homolongi in Central Africa. There were other species with small brains like the Homolongensis in the Philippines, and even the mysterious red deer cave people in China. Considering many of these species have just been discovered in the last decade or two, there will very likely be more species found soon. But here's what's a little disturbing. By 10,000 years ago, every other species except for us was gone. Scientists say the disappearance of all the other hominins looks like a mass extinction event, but not from a catastrophe like an asteroid or a volcanic eruption. Instead, scientists believe every other human relative went extinct because of the rise of Homo sapiens about 260,000 years ago. We came up from southern Africa, spread into the north, and very likely triggered massive bloodshed and loss of life. We competed for land, and we won. Scientists don't know exactly how it all happened, but are fairly sure we had something to do with it. In fact, we are probably directly responsible for the death of the Neanderthals 40,000 years ago, the very people who may have actually been our superiors. They had been living in Europe, and when we spread out of Africa and entered Europe, it brought us into direct confrontation. Whatever happened, the Neanderthals weren't in Europe much longer, and humans spread out across the world like wildfire. Number 1. Homolongi. In Harbin City, China, back in 1933, a mysterious skull was discovered. This skull was perfectly preserved. It had square eye sockets, huge teeth, and evidence of a thick brow. The skull was way bigger than that of the Homo sapiens, and it seemed to belong to a mysterious, unknown species of human. Nobody knew what it meant. and the skull was stashed in a drawer and everyone forgot about it. Until just now. Finally, a team of Chinese and British researchers have studied the skull and identified it as a member of Homolongi, a totally new type of hominid. Here's where things get crazy. The fossil itself is about 146,000 years old, making the Homolongi one of the last men standing in the great race to become the dominant hominin. However, scientists are still trying to determine its relationship with other species and its place in human evolution. Surviving DNA on the skull suggests we may actually be more closely related to the Homolongi than the Neanderthals, which would turn everything we know on its head. Thanks for watching! How do you feel knowing Homo sapiens may have been directly responsible for the extinction of 9 other species of human? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye!